Hello, this is Seraphim, and today I invite you to listen to another original story from my channel, a dramatic tale about power, secrets, and justice. The superintendent of Jefferson County Public Schools signed the expulsion papers on a Tuesday morning, pressing his Mont Blanc pen against the dotted line with the same steady hand he used to sign checks, contracts, and the divorce papers that erased a woman and her unborn child from his life 11 years ago. His name was Dr. Raymond Osei. The boy he was expelling was named Elijah. Elijah Osei, his own son. But before you judge this man, and you will judge him, let me start from the beginning, because the truth of how a father came to destroy his own child's future with a fountain pen is darker and more twisted than you could ever imagine. Elijah Osei was 11 years old, small for his age, with deep brown eyes that held too much knowing for a boy who still believed in superheroes. He lived with his mother Grace in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator had been broken since before he was born. Every morning, Grace woke at 4:30. She would sit on the edge of her bed for exactly 10 seconds, eyes closed, gathering herself the way a swimmer gathers breath before diving into cold water. Then she would rise, wash her face, tie her hair back, and begin her day. Grace worked as a cleaning woman, not for one family, but for 3. Mondays and Wednesdays, she cleaned the Hendersons' house on Maple Ridge, a 6-bedroom colonial where Mrs. Henderson left passive-aggressive notes about dust on the ceiling fan blades. Tuesdays and Thursdays, she cleaned the offices of a small law firm downtown, pushing her mop through hallways where men in expensive suits stepped over the wet floor without looking at her. Fridays, she cleaned the Moreau Mansion on Lakeside Drive, a job she kept because it paid double and she could bring leftover food home to Elijah. She loved that boy the way the earth loves rain, completely, desperately, with everything she had. And Elijah loved his mother back with a fierce loyalty that made him swallow his pain every single day so she would not worry. Because Elijah had a stutter. Not a small occasional hesitation, a full gripping stutter that locked his jaw, twisted his tongue, and turned simple words into battlefields. The letter B was his worst enemy. M came second. His own name was a mountain he had to climb every time a teacher called roll. The stutter had been there since he was 4. Grace had taken him to 3 different doctors, each one more expensive than the last, each one offering the same answer: speech therapy, consistent sessions, patience. But consistent sessions cost money that Grace did not have. Insurance covered 6 visits a year. The waiting list at the free clinic was 14 months long. So Elijah fought his war alone, armed with nothing but his mother's prayers and his own stubborn will to speak in a world that punished him every time he opened his mouth. School was a horror. Jefferson Elementary was not a bad school on paper. It had good test scores, a nice playground, and a principal named Dr. Victoria Ames who smiled in every newsletter photo and wore a different blazer every day of the week. But underneath the polished surface, the school ran on a simple, ugly engine. Kids who fit in were protected, and kids who didn't were left to drown. Elijah was drowning. He had been drowning for 3 years, and nobody had thrown him a rope. The bullying started in 3rd grade with a boy named Marcus Pike. Marcus was 12, held back a year, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of loud confidence that comes from never being told no. His father owned 4 car dealerships and donated generously to the school's athletic program. Marcus wore brand-name sneakers and a gold chain his father gave him for his birthday. He called Elijah Glitch, like a broken video game character, he explained, laughing. The name stuck. Soon the whole class used it, then the whole grade. Then even kids in other grades who had never spoken to Elijah knew him only as Glitch. Every morning, Elijah walked through the front doors of Jefferson Elementary with his backpack straps pulled tight against his shoulders like armor. He kept his head down. He kept his mouth shut. He had learned that silence was safer than speech, that invisibility was better than attention. But Marcus always found him. In the hallway before first period, in the cafeteria during lunch, on the playground during recess. The attacks were never physical. Marcus was too smart for that. They were verbal, surgical, designed to break something inside Elijah that bruises could never reach. "Say my name, Glitch," Marcus would demand, standing in front of him with 3 or 4 friends flanking him like soldiers. "Come on, say Marcus, Marcus." And the other boys would laugh, imitating the stutter, their mouths twisting in exaggerated mockery while Elijah stood there, jaw clenched, fists balled at his sides, the words trapped behind his teeth like prisoners. He never cried in front of them. He saved that for the bathroom stall during 4th period, where he would sit on the closed toilet lid and press his palms against his eyes until the burning stopped. Grace did not know the full extent of it. Elijah was careful about that. When she asked him about school, he gave her the same answer every day. It was, "Fine, Mama." The stutter made even the lie difficult. Grace would look at him, searching his face the way only a mother can, and something in her chest would tighten. She knew. She didn't have the details, but she knew in the way that mothers know, in her bones, in the hollow space behind her ribs where worry lived. But Elijah would smile, and she would let herself believe the smile, because the alternative was a darkness she could not afford to face. Not yet. The apartment they shared was small but clean. Grace kept it spotless, occupational habit, she joked, though it was more than that. Cleanliness was the one thing she could control. The living room had a brown couch with a quilt thrown over the worn spots, a coffee table she'd found at a yard sale, and a small television that only got 12 channels. Elijah's room was barely bigger than a closet, but Grace had painted it blue, his favorite color, and hung a poster of Frederick Douglass on the wall. He stuttered too, Grace had told Elijah when she hung it, and he became one of the greatest speakers this country ever heard. Elijah looked at that poster every night before he fell asleep, and every morning he woke up still stuttering. On the kitchen counter, in a ceramic mug that said, "World's Best Mom" in fading letters, Grace kept a small roll of cash. It was her emergency fund, never more than $200, sometimes as little as $40. She added to it when she could, and took from it only when she had to. Antibiotics for Elijah's ear infection, a new pair of shoes when his toes started pressing against the front of the old ones, the electric bill the month the Moreau family went on vacation and she had no Friday paycheck. That mug was a measure of their survival, and Grace checked it every night the way a sailor checks the horizon for storms. There was a photograph on the wall above the television. It showed Grace at 20, standing outside a church in a yellow dress, smiling so wide you could almost hear her laughing. She was beautiful in that photo. Not just pretty, but radiant, the kind of beauty that comes from joy, from believing the world is good and your place in it is secure. Elijah once asked her who took that picture. Grace had gone quiet for a long moment, then said, "Someone who is not here anymore." She never mentioned Elijah's father, not once, not by name, not by hint, not by accident. It was as if the man had never existed. And Elijah, with the wisdom that children of single mothers develop early, learned not to ask. The truth about Raymond Osai was a locked door that Grace had sealed shut years ago. She told herself the story so many times that it had become smooth and simple, like a river stone. Raymond's family wanted nothing to do with them. His mother had called Grace a distraction. His father, a stern, formal man named Judge Kwame Osai, had sent a lawyer to deliver the message. The Osai family did not acknowledge the pregnancy, did not wish to be contacted, and considered the matter closed. Grace had been 21 years old, 3 months pregnant, working part-time at a grocery store, and she had received this news sitting on a plastic chair in a legal office that smelled like old carpet. She cried for 3 days. Then she stopped crying and started cleaning houses. What Grace did not know, what she could not have known, was that the message from the Osei family was a lie. Judge Kwame Osei never sent a lawyer. He never called Grace a distraction. He never even knew she was pregnant. The lie came from one person and one person only, Raymond Osei himself. Raymond, who was 23 at the time, fresh out of law school, burning with ambition and terrified that a pregnant girlfriend from the wrong side of town would derail the future his father had planned for him. So he told Grace his family rejected her, and he told his family that Grace had ended the relationship and moved away. 2 lies, perfectly placed, like walls built on either side of a bridge, making sure the 2 sides never connected. Raymond's career took off like a rocket after that. He moved to the state capital, earned a doctorate in education policy, married a woman named Claudia whose father sat on the State Board of Education, and climbed the ladder with the speed and precision of a man who had decided that nothing, no memory, no guilt, no ghost, would slow him down. He became a school administrator at 30, a deputy superintendent at 35, and now, at 38, he had just been appointed superintendent of the very school district where his abandoned son sat in a classroom, struggling to say his own name. Judge Kwame Osei's story was different, and it was sadder. Kwame had been a circuit court judge for 27 years, respected, feared, incorruptible. He was the kind of judge who memorized case law the way preachers memorize scripture, and who believed that the law was not just a profession, but a covenant. When a corruption scandal erupted in the county court system, bribes, fixed sentences, evidence tampering, Kwame was the one who blew the whistle. He testified before a state commission with documents, recordings, and names. He named judges he had known for decades. He named prosecutors. He named a state senator. The system did what systems always do to the ones who tell the truth. It destroyed him. Within a year, Kwame was disbarred on fabricated ethics charges. His wife, Raymond's mother, died of a stroke 2 months later, from the stress, Kwame believed, though the doctors called it a blood clot. Raymond, by then already climbing his ladder, distanced himself from his father the way you distance yourself from a sinking ship. He stopped calling, stopped visiting. When reporters asked about his father, Raymond said, "We are not close," in the same flat voice he used for budget presentations. Kwame lost his home, his pension, his reputation. He moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, the same side of town where Grace and Elijah lived, though he did not know this yet. He lived on Social Security and the small amount he earned tutoring law students who came to him quietly, embarrassed to be seen visiting a disgraced judge. He was 71 years old, and he had accepted that the remainder of his life would be spent in this small apartment, with his books and his memories and his regret over a son who had become a stranger. But Kwame had one gift that disgrace could not take from him: his voice. Even in his 70s, Kwame Osei had a voice like polished mahogany, deep, warm, resonant, with a rhythm that made every sentence sound like something worth carving into stone. He had spent decades using that voice in courtrooms, commanding silence with a single word, making juries lean forward in their seats. And after his disbarment, when he had nothing left but time and grief, he began volunteering at a community center, helping children with speech difficulties. He read about stuttering. He studied techniques. He practiced with neighborhood kids whose parents could not afford therapy. He was not a licensed speech therapist, but he was something rarer, a man who understood what it meant to have your voice taken away and who was determined to give it back. It was a Tuesday in October when Elijah's world cracked open. Not loudly, not with drama, with a single sentence spoken by a 12-year-old boy in a school cafeteria, surrounded by 100 witnesses. Elijah was sitting alone at the end of a long table, eating a peanut butter sandwich that Grace had made that morning. She always cut it diagonally because Elijah once told her at age 6 that triangle sandwiches tasted better. She had been cutting them diagonally ever since. He was reading a library book, a novel about a boy who could talk to animals, when a shadow fell over his tray. He knew the shadow. He knew its shape, its weight, its intention. He did not look up. "Hey, Glitch," Marcus said, loud enough for the tables around them to hear. He slid into the seat across from Elijah and leaned forward, grinning. Behind him, 3 boys stood in a loose semicircle, already smiling. "I got a question for you. Real question. Serious." Marcus put his hands together as if in prayer, his face arranged in mock sincerity. "Do you think your mama stutters too? Like, when she's on her knees scrubbing toilets, does she go, 'Why, yes, ma'am, I'll kiki clean that right up'?" The laughter came from everywhere, from the boys behind Marcus, from the table next to them, from kids who didn't even know what was happening, but laughed because everyone else was laughing. Elijah sat perfectly still. The sandwich in his hand might as well have been made of concrete. His vision narrowed until all he could see was the grain of the table, the scratched wood, a carved initial, someone else's mark, someone else's proof that they existed. "Answer me, Glitch," Marcus pressed, his grin widening. "Does she stutter when she begs for her paycheck? Please pay me. I got a broken kid at home." More laughter, louder now. A girl 2 tables over covered her mouth, but her eyes were bright with amusement. A teacher on cafeteria duty was at the far end of the room, scrolling through her phone. Something shifted inside Elijah. Not anger, something older than anger, something that lived in a deeper, quieter place. He looked up at Marcus, and for one terrible second, their eyes locked. Marcus expected fear. He expected tears. He expected the usual lowered gaze, the hunched shoulders, the surrender. What he saw instead was something he did not recognize, because boys like Marcus had never been looked at that way before. It was the look of someone who has reached the bottom and discovered that the bottom has its own kind of strength. Elijah stood up. The cafeteria noise continued around them, but the immediate tables went quiet, sensing the change the way animals sense a shift in weather. Elijah opened his mouth. The stutter came, as it always did, grabbing his tongue, locking his jaw. But he pushed through it with a force that made his whole body tremble. My mama," he said, his voice shaking but climbing, "works harder than your daddy ever did. She doesn't need a dealership to be somebody." The words came out broken and uneven, like stones tumbling down a hill, but they came out. Every single one. And when the last word landed, the silence that followed was the kind of silence that even 12-year-olds understand means something just changed. Marcus's grin flickered, just for a second. Then he recovered, the way bullies always do, with volume. "Oh, the glitch can talk," he shouted, spreading his arms wide. "Everybody, the glitch finally said a whole sentence. Should we give him a trophy?" The laughter returned, but it was different now, thinner, uncertain, like applause at a show where the audience isn't sure what they just watched. Elijah picked up his backpack, left his half-eaten sandwich on the tray, and walked out of the cafeteria. He did not run. He walked, one foot in front of the other, his back straight, his eyes dry. He walked to the bathroom at the end of the east hallway, the one nobody used because the light flickered and the hand dryer was broken. He locked himself in the last stall, sat down on the cold seat, and pressed his forehead against the cool metal of the stall divider. His hands were shaking, his whole body was shaking, but he did not cry. He had used up something in the cafeteria, some reserve of energy or courage, and what was left was just a hollow, ringing quiet, like the inside of a bell after it has been struck. That afternoon, a report was filed, not about Marcus, about Elijah. The report, written by Ms. Chen, the cafeteria duty teacher who had been scrolling her phone, stated that Elijah Osai had initiated a verbal confrontation with another student and had left the cafeteria without permission. The report did not mention what Marcus said. It did not mention the laughter. It did not mention the word glitch. It was 3 sentences long, and it landed on Dr. Victoria Ames's desk at 3:15 that afternoon, right next to her afternoon latte. Dr. Ames read the report, glanced at Elijah's file, below average participation scores, 2 previous behavioral notes for being uncommunicative in class, and made a decision that would set everything in motion. She called Grace. Grace was on her hands and knees in the Hendersons' master bathroom when her phone buzzed. She peeled off one rubber glove, wiped her hand on her apron, and answered. The voice on the other end was polished, professional, and cold. Dr. Ames explained that Elijah had been involved in an incident, that there was a pattern of behavioral concerns, and that she thought it would be best if Grace came in for a meeting. When? Grace asked, her voice careful, the way it always was when she spoke to people who held power over her life. Tomorrow morning at 8:30, Dr. Ames said. And Mrs. Osei, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about whether Jefferson Elementary is the right fit for Elijah. Grace hung up the phone and stared at the bathroom tile. White hexagons, perfectly aligned, cold under her knees. She replayed the sentence in her mind. The right fit. She knew what that meant. She had heard versions of it before, dressed in different words, aimed at different targets, but always meaning the same thing. Your kind does not belong here. She finished cleaning the bathroom. She scrubbed the shower grout with a toothbrush. She polished the faucet until it shone. And when she was done, she sat in her car in the Hendersons' driveway for 15 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the windshield, running through every possible version of tomorrow's meeting in her head. In every version, she was polite. In every version, she was calm. In every version, she lost. The next morning, Grace put on her best clothes, a navy blue dress she kept for church and job interviews, pressed the night before with an iron that hissed and spat steam like a living thing. She braided her hair, put on small gold earrings that had been her mother's, and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was 32 years old and looked 40. Not from age, but from effort. The fine lines around her eyes were maps of every early morning, every late night, every paycheck stretched past its limit. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and practiced the one sentence she had prepared. My son has a right to an education, and I am not withdrawing him. Elijah sat at the kitchen table in his school uniform, eating cereal. He watched his mother with quiet attention, the spoon pausing halfway to his mouth. Mama, he said softly, you don't have to go. I can handle it. Grace crossed the kitchen and put both hands on his face, tilting it up so he had to look at her. Baby, you handle enough, she said. This one is mine. She kissed his forehead, picked up her purse, the one with the broken zipper she held closed with a safety pin, and walked out the door. Jefferson Elementary looked different at 8:30 in the morning than it did during drop-off. Quieter. The hallways were empty, the classrooms just beginning to fill, the building still holding the cool, institutional silence of early hours. Grace signed in at the front desk, where a secretary with reading glasses on a beaded chain gave her a visitor badge without looking up. She clipped the badge to her dress and followed the signs to the administrative wing, her flat shoes making soft sounds on the polished floor. Dr. Ames's office was at the end of the hallway, behind a door with a brass nameplate. Grace knocked. A voice said, "Come in." She opened the door and stepped into a room that smelled like coffee and new carpet. Dr. Ames sat behind a large desk, her blazer today a deep burgundy, her hair pulled back in a smooth bun. She was smiling, but the smile did not reach her eyes. It never did. It was the kind of smile that says, I have already decided the outcome of this conversation, and this meeting is a formality. Mrs. Osei, thank you for coming, Dr. Ames said, gesturing to a chair across from the desk. The chair was lower than the one behind the desk, a small detail, but Grace noticed it. Everything in this room was designed to make the visitor feel smaller. It's Miss, Grace corrected gently, sitting down. She placed her purse on her lap, safety pin facing inward, and folded her hands. Of course, I apologize, Dr. Ames said, not sounding sorry at all. She opened a folder, Elijah's folder. Grace recognized the blue tab, and placed her hands flat on either side of it, as if the file were a map and she was about to show Grace where the dragons lived. Miss Osei, I'll get straight to the point. We've had multiple reports about Elijah over the past 2 years. Low participation, difficulty engaging with peers, yesterday's cafeteria incident, and frankly, his academic performance has been declining. Grace felt the heat rise up the back of her neck, but she kept her voice steady. Elijah's academic performance is declining because he's being bullied, she said. Every single day, by the same boy, and nobody in this school has done anything about it. Not one teacher, not one counselor, not you. Dr. Ames's smile tightened by a fraction. We take bullying very seriously at Jefferson Elementary, she said, in a tone that suggested she took it about as seriously as she took the weather. But the reports we have indicate that Elijah initiated the confrontation yesterday. And his social difficulties, his speech issue. I understand it's a sensitive subject, but it does make classroom integration challenging. His speech issue, Grace repeated, and something in her voice made the room temperature drop by 2 degrees. You mean his stutter? My son has a stutter. It's not a disease, it's not a character flaw. It's a condition that he is working to overcome, and he would overcome it a lot faster if he weren't being mocked for it every day in your school. Dr. Ames leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. The body language was unmistakable. Walls up, decision made, patience waning. "Miss Osei, I'm going to be honest with you, mother to mother," she said. And Grace braced herself because nothing good ever followed that phrase. "I don't think Elijah is school material. Not here, not at this level. There are alternative programs, vocational tracks, special needs schools that might be better suited to his abilities. I think withdrawing him voluntarily would be the kindest thing for everyone." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Grace sat perfectly still. Her hands on her purse did not move. Her face did not change. But inside her chest, something cracked. Not broke, cracked. The way a dam cracks before the water decides what to do. She looked at Dr. Ames across the wide desk and saw everything the woman was. Comfortable, certain, insulated by authority, utterly convinced that a cleaning woman in a borrowed dress had no power and no options. "No," Grace said. Dr. Ames blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," Grace said again, and her voice was quiet, but it filled the room the way water fills a crack. "I am not withdrawing my son. Elijah has a right to attend this school. He has a right to an education, and I will not let you push him out because it's easier for you than dealing with the children who are tormenting him." A pause hung between them, delicate and dangerous. Dr. Ames's jaw tightened. She straightened the folder on her desk, aligning it with the edge, as if order in the physical world could restore her control over the conversation. "Miss Osei, I understand your feelings, but I should let you know that if Elijah's behavioral issues continue, we will be forced to begin formal proceedings. The district superintendent has been reviewing cases like these, and the recommendation will be expulsion." "Then let him review it," Grace said, standing. Her chair scraped against the floor, the sound harsh in the quiet office. "Let whoever needs to see it, see it. My son is not the problem in this school, and I am not the woman you think I am." She picked up her purse, turned, and walked out of the office without looking back. In the hallway, her legs almost gave out. She leaned against the cool wall, pressing her palms flat against the painted cinder block, breathing through her mouth because her nose had clogged with unshed tears. A janitor passed, pushing a cart. He glanced at her and looked away. He had seen parents lean against that wall before. He knew the look. Grace counted to 30, then pushed herself upright and walked out of the building. She sat in her car. The parking lot was filling up now, parents dropping kids off, school buses pulling in with their hydraulic sighs. Grace watched a woman in a Mercedes SUV walk her daughter to the front door, the girl's backpack pink and sparkling, her ponytail bouncing. The woman laughed at something the girl said, kissed her cheek, and walked back to her car without a worry visible on her entire body. Grace looked at her own hands on the steering wheel, dry, cracked at the knuckles, a small cut on her thumb from the Henderson's shower door. These hands were all she had. She drove to work, she cleaned, she scrubbed, she polished. And that night, after Elijah was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with her phone and searched, "Free speech therapy near me." The results were the same ones she'd seen 100 times before. Waiting lists, programs full, clinics that required insurance she didn't have. But on the second page, buried between a church hotline and a community garden advertisement, there was a small listing. Speech coaching for children. Free, East Side. Call Mr. K. Osei. Grace stared at the name. Osei. The same name, her name, or rather, the name she had chosen to give Elijah, because despite everything, she wanted her son to carry his father's name, to have at least that much of a heritage. It was a common enough West African name. She told herself it was a coincidence. She wrote down the number on a scrap of paper and tucked it under the ceramic mug on the counter. She called the next morning from the Henderson's driveway before she went inside to work. The phone rang 4 times. Then a voice answered. A voice so deep and so steady that Grace felt something in her chest go still, the way a room goes still when someone important walks in. "Hello?" the voice said. This is Kwame. I'm calling about the speech coaching, Grace said. For my son, he's 11. He has a stutter. I saw your listing online. She paused. I should tell you up front, I can't pay. I'm a cleaning woman. I work 3 houses. I have nothing extra. But my boy, he needs help. He needs someone to help him find his voice. The silence on the other end was long enough that Grace thought the call had dropped. Then Kwame spoke, and his voice was different, softer, as if he had heard something in her words that she hadn't meant to say. What is your son's name? Elijah, Grace said. Elijah Osei. Another silence, longer. Grace pressed the phone harder against her ear. Sir, are you there? I'm here, Kwame said, and something in those 2 words sounded like a door opening. Bring him Saturday, 10 o'clock. I'll text you the address. And miss, there is no charge. There will never be a charge. Some things in this world are not for sale. Grace thanked him 3 times, which embarrassed her, and hung up. She sat in the driveway for a moment, the phone warm in her hand, and for the first time in months, she felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. It wasn't hope exactly. It was smaller than hope. It was the feeling of a match being struck in a dark room. You can't see much, but you can see enough to take the next step. Saturday came. Grace dressed Elijah in clean jeans and his good shirt, the one with a collar, the one she ironed on Friday nights. He was nervous. She could tell by the way he kept pulling at the hem of his shirt, and by the extra tightness in his stuttering when he asked where they were going. To see a man who helps with speaking, she told him, keeping it simple, because complicated explanations just gave anxiety more room to grow. They took the bus. 2 transfers, 40 minutes. The neighborhood Kwame lived in was not much different from their own. Brick apartment buildings with iron railings, a corner store with a faded awning, a barber shop with a spinning pole that had stopped spinning years ago. Grace checked the address twice, then led Elijah up a narrow staircase to a second-floor apartment. She knocked. The door opened, and Kwame Osei stood before them. He was tall, even at 71, the kind of tall that age bends but does not break. His hair was white, close-cropped, and his face was lined with decades of weather and worry. But his eyes were sharp and bright, the color of dark honey, and when they landed on Elijah, something happened in those eyes that Grace did not catch, but that Kwame felt in every cell of his body. He recognized the boy, not intellectually, viscerally. The shape of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the exact brown of his skin, which was the same brown as Raymond's, which was the same brown as Kwame's own father's. This was his grandson. He knew it the way you know your own heartbeat, not because you can hear it, but because it is the rhythm underneath everything. Kwame said nothing. He smiled, stepped back, and opened the door wider. "Come in," he said, "both of you." The apartment was small and overflowing with books. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined every wall, stuffed with legal volumes, history books, biographies, novels, and stacks of papers tied with rubber bands. A window faced east, letting in morning light that caught the dust motes and turned them into tiny stars. There was an old leather armchair by the window, its seat shaped by years of the same body sitting in the same position. A small kitchen, a bathroom with a dripping faucet, and on the mantel above a non-functioning fireplace, a single framed photograph. A young man in a graduation gown, grinning, holding a diploma. Raymond, at 22. Before the lies, before the ladder, before the fortress of ambition that sealed him away from everyone who loved him. Elijah stared at the books with wide eyes. He loved reading. It was the one place where words didn't fight him, where language flowed instead of stuttered, where he could be fluent and free. Kwame watched the boy's eyes move across the shelves and felt something crack open in his chest that he had kept sealed for years. "Do you like books?" Kwame asked. Elijah nodded. Then, with visible effort, he spoke. "I like the ones about people who overcome things." Kwame looked at the boy for a long moment. "So do I," he said quietly. "So do I." He turned to Grace. "Miss Osei, you are welcome to stay or you are welcome to come back in an hour. Elijah and I will be fine." Grace hesitated. She looked at Elijah, who gave her a small nod. The nod of a boy who was scared but willing. She kissed his forehead, thanked Kwame again, and went downstairs to wait in the small courtyard between the buildings, where she sat on a bench and stared at the sky and wondered for the 1000th time if she was doing enough. Inside the apartment, Kwame did not begin with exercises. He began with a story. He sat in his leather chair and gestured for Elijah to sit on the small couch across from him. And then he told the boy about a young lawyer, decades ago, who had been so nervous before his first court appearance that his voice shook and his words tangled, and the judge had to ask him to repeat himself 3 times. "That young lawyer was me," Kwame said. And the admission was so unexpected, so gently delivered, that Elijah's shoulders dropped an inch. The first time they had relaxed in weeks. "You stuttered?" Elijah asked, eyes wide. "Not exactly," Kwame said. "But I know what it is to have your voice refuse to cooperate with your mind. I know what it is to have the right words locked inside you and the wrong sounds coming out. And I know what it is to stand in a room full of people who are waiting for you to fail." He leaned forward, and his honey-dark eyes held Elijah's with a steady warmth that the boy had never received from any adult outside his mother. "The first thing I want you to understand, Elijah, is that your stutter is not your enemy. It is not a wall, it is a door, and we are going to find the key." They worked for an hour. Kwame was patient in the way that only people who have lost everything can be patient, without hurry, without performance, without the need to prove anything. He taught Elijah breathing techniques, how to fill his belly with air before starting a sentence, how to slow down the rush of words that piled up behind his stutter like cars behind a crash. He taught him to tap his thigh gently with his finger as he spoke, a rhythm, a metronome, a way of giving the body permission to release the words one at a time instead of all at once. "Try again," Kwame said, again and again, and each time his voice held the same steady warmth, no frustration, no impatience, no pity. And Elijah, who was used to being corrected with sighs and sideways glances, began to unfold, slowly, carefully, the way a plant turns toward light it has been starved of. By the end of that first session, Elijah could say, "My name is Elijah," with only one small hesitation on the E. It was not a miracle, it was not a movie moment, but when the words came out, "My name is Elijah," smoother than they had ever come before, the boy looked at Kwame with an expression that nearly broke the old man's heart. It was the expression of someone who had just been told, for the first time, that they were not broken. Grace came back upstairs and found them laughing. Laughing! Elijah was laughing at something Kwame had said, a real laugh, the kind that starts in the belly and comes out loose and free. And Grace stood in the doorway and pressed her hand against her chest because the sound of her son laughing was the most beautiful and most painful thing she had heard in years. "Same time next Saturday?" Kwame asked. And Grace nodded, unable to speak, because now it was her voice that was locked behind tears she refused to let fall. They came back every Saturday, rain or shine, bus or walk, always at 10, always for an hour. Kwame never charged a penny. He never mentioned payment. He never made Grace feel like a charity case. He treated them both with a quiet dignity that Grace recognized instinctively as the dignity of a man who had once held authority and still carried it in his bones, even though the world had stripped him of its trappings. Weeks passed. Elijah's stutter did not disappear. Kwame told him it might never fully disappear, and that was okay, but it softened. The sharp edges rounded, the long blocks shortened. Words that used to take 10 seconds of jaw-clenching effort now came in 3. Elijah began to speak in class again, not often, not loudly, but enough. He raised his hand in history, his favorite subject. He answered a question about the Underground Railroad, and when the words came out smooth enough for the whole class to hear, a girl in the front row turned around and smiled at him. Just smiled. It was the first time a classmate had smiled at him in 3 years. The bullying did not stop. Marcus still called him Glitch. The boys still laughed. But something had shifted in Elijah's center of gravity. The words still hurt, but they landed on something harder now, a surface that Kwame was helping him build, week by week, sentence by sentence, breath by breath. Elijah was not fixed, but he was becoming fortified. Meanwhile, in the oak-paneled office on the 6th floor of the Jefferson County School District headquarters, Dr. Raymond Osai was settling into his new position with the smooth efficiency of a man who had been preparing for this role his entire career. His office was twice the size of Dr. Ames's, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. On his desk sat a framed photo of himself and Claudia at a gala, both of them smiling, both of them wearing the kind of clothing that costs more than Grace earned in a month. His Mont Blanc pen lay on a leather blotter beside a stack of files marked Priority Review. Raymond was handsome, in the polished, careful way of men who understand that appearance is a form of armor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with skin the color of oiled teak and a jaw that looked like it had been designed by an architect. His voice was measured, his handshake firm, his eye contact deliberate. He was, in every external measure, a success. But success, like a house, depends on what's in the foundation. And Raymond's foundation was built on lies. Dr. Ames came to see him on a Thursday afternoon. She brought a folder, the same blue tab folder she had opened in front of Grace. She sat in the chair across from Raymond's desk and laid out her case with the practiced confidence of a woman who knew exactly what her boss wanted to hear. "We have a student," she said, "who has been flagged multiple times for behavioral issues, low participation, social conflicts, a speech impediment that significantly impacts classroom function. The mother came in and, frankly, she was combative, refused to consider withdrawal. I think we're looking at a formal expulsion recommendation." Raymond picked up the folder. He opened it. He saw the name, Elijah Osei, and for one moment, one fraction of a second, his pen stopped moving. His eyes fixed on the name the way a deer fixes on headlights. Then training kicked in, the same training that had carried him through a decade of meetings and decisions, and he turned the page. "What's the mother's name?" he asked, his voice perfectly level. Dr. Ames checked her notes. "Grace Osei. She's a cleaning woman, single mother, no college education." She was quite firm about keeping the boy enrolled, but honestly, Raymond, the school would function better without the distraction. Raymond closed the folder. His face showed nothing. Inside his chest, a fist was squeezing something vital, something he had buried so deep he thought it had died. Grace. He had not heard that name spoken aloud in 11 years. And Elijah. That was the name she had chosen. She had kept his last name. She had given his son his name. The realization hit him like a wave of cold water, and for a second, the room tilted. "I'll review the file," he said. "Leave it with me." Dr. Ames smiled, the same smile she had given Grace, the one that never reached her eyes. "I think you'll agree with the recommendation," she said. "Some children just aren't built for the standard system." She stood, smoothed her blazer, and walked out. Raymond sat alone in his office. The folder lay on his desk like a grenade. He did not open it again. He sat and stared at the skyline through his window, and for the first time in years, the view did not make him feel powerful. It made him feel exposed. Like a man standing on a glass floor, suddenly aware of the drop beneath him. He did nothing that day. He did nothing the next day. He told himself it was a coincidence, that Osai was a common name, that the cleaning woman and the boy were strangers. He told himself all the lies he needed to tell himself, and then, on Saturday morning, he opened his laptop and searched for Grace Osai on social media. He found her in 12 seconds. One photo, taken by a neighbor at a church picnic. Grace standing beside a boy, skinny, bright-eyed, wearing a second-hand jacket. And the boy was smiling, and the boy had Raymond's face. Raymond's exact face at 11 years old. The same jaw, the same eyebrows, the same way of holding his head slightly tilted, as if the world were a question he was still working out. Raymond closed the laptop. He walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it standing at the counter. His hand was shaking. Not a lot, just enough that the water trembled in the glass. Claudia was at her Pilates class. The house was silent. He stood in the kitchen of a home that cost $900,000 and felt, for the first time, like a man standing in someone else's house. What did he do? He did nothing. That was Raymond's talent, the ability to do nothing, to let inaction speak for him, to let silence serve as a decision. He did not call Grace. He did not pull Elijah's file back up. He did not drive to the school to see his son. He went to a board meeting. He reviewed budget proposals. He had lunch with the school board chair. And when Dr. Ames emailed him that afternoon, asking if he had reviewed the expulsion recommendation, he typed 3 words: approved. Proceed accordingly. 3 words, 11 characters. And with them, a father sealed the expulsion of his own son. But what Raymond did not know, what no one knew, was that every Saturday morning, while Raymond was reviewing spreadsheets in his mansion, his son was sitting across from his father in a tiny apartment filled with books, learning to speak. Kwame knew. He had known from the first moment. But Kwame was a man who had spent his life in courtrooms, and he understood something that most people do not. The most powerful evidence is the evidence you hold in reserve. He said nothing to Grace about the connection. He said nothing to Elijah. He taught the boy. He watched him grow. He memorized his laugh, his expressions, the way he rubbed his right ear when he was thinking hard. And he waited, because Kwame had learned, through decades of law and loss, that truth has its own schedule, and trying to rush it only makes it run. But there were moments, small moments, that almost broke his silence. One Saturday, Elijah was practicing his breathing exercises, and he stopped mid-sentence and looked at Kwame with those deep brown eyes and said, "Mr. Kwame, do you have any kids?" Kwame's hands, folded on his lap, tightened. His thumbs pressed against each other until the nails went white. "I have a son," he said carefully, "but we are not close." "Why not?" Elijah asked, with the blunt curiosity that only children have. Kwame looked at the boy, at his grandson, and the answer that rose in his throat was so large and so sharp that it took everything he had to swallow it back down. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "people choose ambition over love, and by the time they realize their mistake, the road back has grown over with weeds." Elijah nodded, as if this made perfect sense to him. "My mama says my dad's family didn't want us," he said. "She says they thought we weren't good enough." Kwame felt the room tilt. His vision blurred for a second, and he gripped the arms of his chair to steady himself. "She says they thought we weren't good enough." The lie. Raymond's lie. The lie that had stolen 11 years from everyone, from Grace, from Elijah, from Kwame himself. The lie that had built walls where there should have been bridges and filled silence where there should have been laughter. "Elijah," Kwame said, and his voice was rough, as if the words were coming from somewhere deep and bruised. "Listen to me. You are good enough. You are more than enough. Whatever you were told about people not wanting you, some stories are wrong, and the people who tell wrong stories sometimes don't even know they're wrong." He paused, breathed, steadied himself. "Now, let's try that sentence again, from the top." The weeks kept turning. 6 Saturdays became 10. 10 became 15. Elijah's progress was remarkable, not because the stutter vanished, but because the boy's relationship to it changed. He no longer treated it as a shameful secret. He no longer avoided speaking. In Kwame's apartment, surrounded by books and patience and the steady voice of a man who never once made him feel small, Elijah was becoming someone new. Not a different person, a more complete version of himself. The version that had always been there, buried under years of mockery and silence, waiting for someone to say, "You have a voice, and it matters." Grace noticed the change. She noticed it in the way Elijah held himself when he walked, shoulders back, chin up, not the hunched posture of a boy bracing for impact. She noticed it in the way he spoke to her at dinner, longer sentences, more fluid, still halting in places but flowing in others. She noticed it in the way he looked at her when she came home from work, as if he wanted to tell her something but was waiting for the right time. And she noticed something else. He was happy. For the first time since 2nd grade, her son was happy. But the school would not let them be. One morning, Grace found a letter in the mailbox. It was from the Jefferson County School District, signed by Dr. Raymond Osei, superintendent, and it informed her, in language so formal it was practically armored, that her son, Elijah Osei, was being recommended for formal expulsion from Jefferson Elementary School, effective at the end of the semester, pending a review hearing. Grounds: persistent behavioral issues, failure to meet participation standards, and incompatibility with the school's academic environment. Grace read the letter twice. She read it a third time. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, walked into the kitchen, and placed it on the counter, beside the ceramic mug. Her hands were steady. Her face was stone. But behind her eyes, a storm was building. The kind of storm that lives inside women who have been pushed and pushed and pushed until pushing back is no longer a choice, but a physical necessity. She called Kwame. She did not know why she called him. He was her son's speech coach, not her confidant. But his number was in her phone, and his voice was the steadiest thing she knew. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Osei," he said, "is everything all right?" "They're expelling my son," Grace said, and her voice broke on the word expelling the way a branch breaks in a storm, sharp and sudden. She told him everything: the letter, the meeting with Dr. Ames, the superintendent's signature, the language, the deadline. She talked for 5 minutes straight, and Kwame listened in absolute silence, and when she was done, the silence continued for another 10 seconds that felt like an hour. "Bring the letter on Saturday," Kwame said. "Bring the letter, bring any documents you have from the school, and bring Elijah. We will talk." "Mr. Kwame, I don't know what a speech coach can do about an expulsion," Grace said, and she did not mean to sound rude, but exhaustion and fear had stripped the polish from her words. "Miss Osei," Kwame said, and his voice dropped to the register he had once used in courtrooms, the voice that made lawyers go still and juries lean forward. "I am many things, and before this is over, you will know all of them. But first, Saturday, 10 o'clock, don't be late." Grace hung up and stared at her phone. Something in his tone had shifted the ground beneath her feet, just slightly, the way an earthquake's first tremor shifts a glass of water on a nightstand. Not enough to topple anything, enough to know that something was moving underground. Saturday came. Grace arrived with Elijah and a manila envelope containing the expulsion letter, 3 years of Elijah's report cards, the original incident report from the cafeteria, and a handwritten timeline of every bullying incident she could remember. Kwame took the envelope, put on his reading glasses, old-fashioned wireframes that made him look like a professor from another century, and sat in his leather chair, reading each document slowly, turning each page with the deliberate care of a man who had spent decades reading legal filings. Elijah sat on the couch, watching. He had never seen Mr. Kwame like this. The gentle, patient speech coach was still there, but layered over him now was someone else, someone sharper, harder, with eyes that moved across the pages like searchlights. "This incident report," Kwame said, holding it up. "It says Elijah initiated a verbal confrontation. Is that what happened?" Elijah shook his head. Marcus called my mama names," he said. "He said she stutters when she cleans. He said she begs for her paycheck. I told him my mama works harder than his dad." Elijah paused, then added, quieter, "That's all I said." Kwame looked at the boy over the tops of his glasses. His face was unreadable, but his hands, resting on the arms of the chair, had curled into fists. Not from anger at Elijah, from something much larger. "And this teacher, Ms. Chen, she heard what Marcus said?" "She was on her phone," Elijah said. Kwame nodded slowly. He removed his glasses, folded them, and placed them on the side table with a precision that Grace found oddly calming. Then he looked at Grace, and his eyes held something she had not seen before. Not warmth, though warmth was there. Authority. The kind of authority that does not need a title or a desk or a nameplate. The kind that lives in the spine. "Miss Osei," Kwame said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down and listen to all of it before you respond." He gestured to the couch. Grace sat next to Elijah, her arm instinctively going around her son's shoulders. "I was not always a speech coach. I was a judge a circuit court judge, for 27 years. Grace's eyes widened. She looked at the books on the shelves, the legal volumes, the case law reporters, the thick biographies of justices. And suddenly, the apartment made sense in a way it hadn't before. This was not the apartment of a hobbyist. This was the library of a man who had built his life on law. I was disbarred, Kwame continued, for telling the truth about corruption in the court system. I testified. I named names. And they took everything from me, my position, my pension, my reputation. My wife died from the stress. My son. He paused. The pause was long enough for the clock on the mantel to tick 4 times. My son walked away. Grace listened, her hand tightening on Elijah's shoulder. Something cold was moving through her body, a premonition, the feeling you get when a story you thought you understood begins to rearrange itself in front of your eyes. Your son, Grace said slowly. What is your son's name? Kwame looked at her, and in his eyes she saw a pain so old and so heavy that it had become part of his face, like the lines around his mouth, like the white in his hair. His name, Kwame said, is Raymond. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a Saturday session, but a silence with weight, a silence that pressed against the walls and the windows and the books on the shelves. Grace's hand dropped from Elijah's shoulder. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She stared at Kwame, and the pieces began falling. Not slowly, not gently, but all at once, like a shelf collapsing, books and dust and truth crashing to the floor. You're Raymond's father, she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. You're Elijah's grandfather. Kwame nodded. His eyes were wet, but the tears did not fall. He held them the way he held everything, with discipline, with control, with the practiced steadiness of a man who had learned that falling apart was a luxury he could not afford. I knew the moment I saw him, he said. He looks exactly like Raymond did at that age. The same face, the same eyes, the same tilt of the head. His voice cracked, just slightly, just enough for Grace to hear the fracture line. He is my grandson, I have no doubt. Grace stood up. She did not mean to stand. Her body did it on its own, propelled by a surge of emotion that was too big for sitting. Her hands were trembling, her vision blurred. You knew, she said, and the words came out hard and sharp, edged with 11 years of grief. You knew, and you said nothing. For months, you sat with my son, you taught him, you listened to him talk about his father's family not wanting him, and you said nothing. Mama? Elijah's voice, small and confused, came from the couch. He looked between his mother and Kwame, sensing the earthquake but not understanding its epicenter. Kwame did not flinch. He did not look away. He held Grace's gaze with the same steady, honey-dark eyes, and he spoke with the careful precision of a man who has rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind. I said nothing because I needed to understand the full picture before I acted. I said nothing because trust, once broken, cannot be repaired with a confession, only with consistent action. I have been earning your trust, Miss Osei, and I have been earning Elijah's, not as a grandfather making claims, as a man doing the work. Grace's jaw clenched. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab Elijah and walk out and never come back. But she also wanted to sit back down, because the truth was that Kwame had done more for her son in 15 weeks than any person, any institution, any system had done in 11 years. The truth was that Elijah was better. The truth was that Kwame had shown up every Saturday with patience and warmth and zero expectation of recognition. What about the lie? Grace demanded, still standing, still trembling. Your family sent a lawyer to tell me you wanted nothing to do with us, that you thought I was a distraction, that the matter was closed. Kwame's face changed. The steadiness cracked. Something raw moved behind his eyes. Not surprise, but confirmation of a suspicion he had long held and finally heard spoken. No lawyer was ever sent, he said, and each word was heavy, measured, placed like bricks. I never knew you were pregnant. I never knew Elijah existed until the day you walked through that door. Grace pressed her fist against her mouth. Her body swayed. She sat down, hard, on the arm of the couch, missing the cushion, almost falling, catching herself. Then who told the lawyer? Who sent the message? Who said all those things? Raymond, Kwame said. My son, your son's father. He lied to you, and he lied to me. He told you my family rejected you. He told me you had left. 2 lies, 2 walls. He built them so he could climb his ladder without anything pulling him back down. Grace stared at the floor. The dust motes drifted through the morning light, tiny and aimless. She felt Elijah's hand on her arm. His small hand, the hand she held when they crossed the street, the hand that gripped hers in the dark when he had nightmares. She looked at her son, and he was looking at Kwame with an expression she had never seen before. It was not confusion, it was recognition. The kind of recognition that happens not in the mind, but in the blood. Mr. Kwame, Elijah said, and his voice was steadier than Grace had ever heard it. Are you my grandfather? Kwame looked at the boy. The tears he had been holding finally broke free. Not dramatically, not with sobs, but quietly. 2 lines running down the creases of his face, following paths that grief had carved years ago. Yes, he said, I am. Elijah was quiet for a long time. He sat on the couch, very still, his hands in his lap, processing. Grace watched him, terrified of what he might feel, what he might say, what new wound this might open. Then Elijah looked up at Kwame and said, in a voice that did not stutter, not once, not on a single syllable, I always wanted a grandfather. Kwame pressed his hand over his eyes. His shoulders shook. Grace looked at the old man, this proud, broken, rebuilt man, and something inside her shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The understanding that comes when you realize your enemy was never the person you thought it was. The letter, Grace said, pulling herself together, pulling the pieces of her broken understanding into a new shape. The expulsion letter. It was signed by the superintendent. She paused. The superintendent is Raymond. Yes, Kwame said, wiping his face with the back of his hand, straightening in his chair, becoming the judge again. My son is the superintendent of the school district that is expelling his own son. A son he knows about, I am certain of it now. He saw the name, he saw your name, and he signed the papers anyway. The full weight of it settled on Grace like a physical thing. She felt it on her shoulders, on her chest, on the top of her head. Raymond knew. He had seen the file. He had seen the name. And he had chosen, deliberately, consciously, with his fancy pen on his fancy desk, to expel his own child. Not because Elijah deserved it, because Elijah's existence was a threat, a thread that, if pulled, would unravel the tapestry of lies that Raymond had spent 11 years weaving. What do we do? Grace asked, and her voice was different now. The grief was still there, but underneath it was something harder, something colder, something that Kwame recognized because he had felt it himself, years ago, sitting in a witness stand, about to name names. It was resolve. Kwame reached beside his chair and pulled out a leather briefcase, old, cracked at the corners, the initials KAO barely visible on the brass clasp. He opened it and withdrew a thick stack of papers, neatly organized, tabbed with colored flags. I have been preparing, he said, since the first Saturday. I have gathered Raymond's employment records, his appointment timeline, and his connection to this district. I have documented Elijah's academic history, his speech progress, and every session we have had. I have a written account of the lies Raymond told, to you and to me, and I have evidence that the so-called lawyer who delivered the message was, in fact, Raymond's college roommate, a man named Derek Phillips, who is not and has never been a licensed attorney. Grace stared at the papers. You did all this while teaching Elijah to speak? I was a judge for 27 years, Kwame said, and for the first time, something like a smile crossed his face. Not warm, not gentle, but sharp with edges. Building a case is like breathing to me. I never forgot how. He paused, then added, and some fights are worth more than others. This one is worth everything. They spent the rest of that Saturday planning. Grace called in sick to her Monday job, the first time she had called in sick in 4 years. Kwame spread his documents across the coffee table and walked Grace through the case step by step. There was the expulsion itself, which was procedurally flawed. The school had not followed its own anti-bullying protocols, had not documented Marcus's harassment, and had placed the blame on the victim. There was Raymond's conflict of interest, a superintendent approving the expulsion of a student who shared his last name without disclosing the relationship. And there was the deeper story, a father who had abandoned his pregnant partner, fabricated a rejection from his family, and then, years later, used his institutional power to erase the evidence of his betrayal. "We need a lawyer," Grace said, her practical mind cutting through the emotion. "I have one," Kwame said, "a former clerk of mine. Her name is Adana Williams. She works at a civil rights firm downtown. She has been waiting for my call." He picked up his phone. "I told her 3 months ago that I might have a case for her. I told her it was personal. She said she would clear her calendar." Grace shook her head slowly, staring at the old man in his worn leather chair, surrounded by his books and his evidence and his quiet, unbreakable determination. "You planned all of this," she said, "from the very beginning." "I planned for the possibility," Kwame corrected gently. "I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. I hoped Raymond might—" He stopped. He looked at the photograph on the mantel, the young man in the graduation gown, grinning with the whole-body confidence of someone who had not yet learned what he was capable of destroying. "I hoped my son might choose differently." He did not. That night, after Elijah was asleep, Grace sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she did not drink. The ceramic mug sat on the counter, the emergency cash untouched. The expulsion letter lay on the table, its formal language glowing under the kitchen light. She read the superintendent's name again, Dr. Raymond Osei. She traced the letters with her fingertip. This was the man she had loved at 20. The man who had held her hand through movies, who had brought her sunflowers on their 3rd date because she mentioned she liked yellow, who had whispered plans for their future in the dark of his apartment. A house, a family, a life. And then he had erased her, cleanly, completely, with a lie. She thought about Elijah, asleep in his blue room, under his Frederick Douglass poster. She thought about the way he had said, "I always wanted a grandfather," with a voice that didn't break, didn't stumble, didn't falter. She thought about Kwame, alone in his apartment, building his case with the patience and precision of a man who had lost everything except his belief in justice. And she thought about Raymond, in his mansion, with his wife, with his title, with his Mont Blanc pen, sleeping soundly in a bed built on the bones of the people he had discarded. Grace did not sleep that night. She sat at the table until the first gray light came through the window, and when the sun was fully up, she washed her face, tied her hair back, and called in sick for the 2nd time in 4 years. She had work to do. Different work. The kind that didn't involve rubber gloves and bleach, but that required the same thing she brought to every job: the willingness to get down on her knees and fight until the surface was clean. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Adana Williams was everything Kwame said she would be: sharp, fearless, and furious. She was 38, with close-cropped natural hair and a wardrobe of tailored suits in bold colors. She had grown up in a neighborhood not unlike Grace's, raised by a grandmother who cleaned office buildings, and she took Grace's case with a fire in her eyes that Grace recognized. It was the fire of someone who had been underestimated her whole life, and had turned that underestimation into fuel. Adana filed a formal challenge to the expulsion with the school board. She filed a conflict of interest complaint against Superintendent Raymond Osei. She filed a request for all documents related to Elijah's disciplinary record, Marcus Pike's disciplinary record, and the school's anti-bullying compliance reports. She did it all in 72 hours, with the ruthless efficiency of a woman who knew that justice delayed was justice denied. The school board scheduled a hearing. 3 weeks out, public, open to parents, faculty, and press. Adana smiled when she got the notification. "Public is exactly what we want," she told Grace. "Men like Raymond operate best in the dark. They melt in the light." During those 3 weeks, something else happened. Something Kwame set in motion with a single phone call to a man he had not spoken to in 15 years. Derek Phillips. Raymond's college roommate, the fake lawyer. The man who had sat across from a 21-year-old pregnant woman and delivered a message of rejection that had never been sent. Derek, now 52, was working as a real estate agent in another city. He had grown a conscience in the years since, the way some people grow tumors, slowly, painfully, impossible to ignore. When Kwame's number appeared on his phone, he let it ring 3 times, then answered with a voice that was already shaking. "I know who you are," Derek said, "and I know why you're calling." "Then you know what I need," Kwame said. "I'll give you a statement," Derek said, "notarized, under oath, whatever you need. I've been carrying this for 11 years, Judge Osei. It's the heaviest thing I've ever held." "Then put it down," Kwame said. "Put it down and let it do what truth always does." Derek's notarized statement arrived by courier 4 days later. 6 pages, single-spaced, every detail. Raymond's phone call asking him to pose as a lawyer, the script Raymond had written for him, the $200 Raymond had paid him, the look on Grace's face when she heard the words. Derek had described it in the statement, her face, her hands, the way she held her stomach as if trying to protect the baby inside her from the words. He remembered every detail because guilt, unlike most things, does not fade with time. It sharpens. Kwame read the statement in his apartment, alone, at midnight. He read it twice. Then he set it down, removed his glasses, and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the ticking of the clock on the mantel. His son, his only child. The boy he had raised, had taught to read, had driven to school every morning, had watched graduate with tears of pride streaming down his face. That boy had become a man who paid $200 to break a pregnant woman's heart. Kwame pressed his palms together and whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, not for revenge, but for the strength to do what needed to be done without hate poisoning the process. Grace, meanwhile, was fighting her own battle with the past. The memories came at night, uninvited, relentless. Raymond's face at 23, younger, softer, without the polished mask he wore now. His laugh, the way he said grace as if her name were a song. The sunflowers he brought her, the plans he whispered, the apartment where they had made Elijah, though neither of them knew it at the time. And the day it ended, the day the fake lawyer sat across from her in that office and said, "The Osei family considers the matter closed." She had felt, in that moment, as if she had been erased, as if a giant hand had reached down and wiped her from a whiteboard, leaving only a faint smudge where she used to be. She sat with these memories the way you sit with a fever, enduring, waiting, knowing it would pass. And it did pass each time, replaced by something harder. Grace had spent 11 years being quiet, being polite, being the woman who said yes, ma'am, and of course, sir, and thank you for the opportunity. She had swallowed more indignities than most people could count. The notes about dust, the wet floors stepped over, the invisible presence in rooms full of people who never learned her name. She had done it for Elijah. Everything, always, for Elijah. But now, for the first time, she was going to stop swallowing. She was going to open her mouth, and the world was going to hear what came out. Elijah knew something was happening. Children always know. They feel the shift in their parents' energy the way animals feel changes in barometric pressure. His mother was the same. Same routines, same love, same diagonal sandwiches, but there was something different underneath. A tightness, a focus, as if she were preparing for something that required every ounce of her. He asked her one evening as she washed dishes and he dried, "Mama, are you okay?" Grace looked at him. Soap bubbles clung to her wrists. The kitchen light was warm and yellow, and in it, Elijah's face was so much like Raymond's that it hurt. But also, and more importantly, so much like her own. He had her stubbornness, her patience, her refusal to break. "I'm getting ready," she said. "For what?" She handed him a plate. For a fight. Elijah considered this. He placed the plate carefully in the drying rack. "Can I help?" Grace smiled. It was the first real smile she had managed in days, and it felt like a crack in a dam. Dangerous, necessary, unstoppable. "You already are, baby. Every day you walk into that school, you help. Every time you speak up, you help. Every Saturday with Mr. Kwame, you help." She paused, then added softly, Just keep being you. That's the most powerful thing you can do. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday. Public, room 304 of the Jefferson County School District headquarters. The large conference room with tiered seating, usually used for budget presentations and policy forums. Adana had ensured that the local press was notified. Not because we want a circus, she told Grace, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. 2 reporters confirmed attendance, one from the local newspaper, one from a regional news station. A blogger who covered education policy in the county also planned to attend. The day before the hearing, Grace stood in her kitchen at midnight, ironing the navy blue dress. The iron hissed and spat. She pressed the fabric slowly, carefully, smoothing out every wrinkle. And she thought about the last time she had worn this dress, to Dr. Ames's office, where she had been told her son wasn't school material. This time, she was not going to ask for permission. She was not going to plead. She was going to present facts, and the facts were going to do what facts do when they are finally allowed to speak. They were going to burn. Elijah was asleep. She checked on him. He slept on his side, one arm under the pillow, his mouth slightly open. His breathing was slow and even. Above him, Frederick Douglass looked down from the poster, and Grace whispered to the wall, to the poster, to no one. He stuttered too. And he changed the world. Morning came fast. Grace got dressed. She put on the gold earrings. She gripped the manila envelope, now thick with Adana's filings, Kwame's evidence, Derek's statement, and Elijah's speech progress reports. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the woman who had looked in this same mirror before the meeting with Dr. Ames. Same face, same lines, same hands. But the eyes were different. The jaw was set differently. The shoulders were held differently. This was not a woman going to a meeting. This was a woman going to war. Kwame met them at the bus stop. He wore a suit, old but immaculate, charcoal gray, with a white shirt and a dark tie. Grace had never seen him in anything but his Saturday sweater and reading glasses. In the suit, he looked like what he was, a man who had once commanded courtrooms. His posture was straight. His chin was lifted. His eyes were the eyes of someone who had been waiting for this moment, the way a river waits for the sea. "Are you ready?" he asked Grace. "I've been ready for 11 years, she said. Kwame nodded. He looked at Elijah, who stood between them in his school uniform, his backpack on, his face calm with the eerie composure of a child who has decided to trust the adults around him. Kwame put his hand on the boy's shoulder, the first time he had ever touched his grandson, and the weight of it, the warmth of it, the sheer physicality of touching the child he had not known existed until 5 months ago, made his jaw clench so tight that the muscle in his cheek jumped. "Let's go," he said. They rode the bus in silence. Grace sat by the window. Kwame sat beside her. Elijah sat across the aisle, watching the city scroll past, his reflection ghosting in the glass. The bus passed through neighborhoods that told the story of the city's inequality in real time. Boarded-up houses, then strip malls, then tree-lined streets, then the glass and steel towers of the district headquarters. They got off at the last stop and walked 2 blocks to the building. Room 304 was already half full when they arrived. Parents sat in clusters, some curious, some concerned. 3 school board members sat behind a long table at the front, their nameplates glinting under the fluorescent lights. Dr. Ames sat at a smaller table to the left, her blazer today a deep navy, her folder open in front of her, her face arranged in the neutral expression of someone who expected this to go exactly as planned. And at the far end of the front table, in a chair that was slightly larger and slightly higher than the others, sat Dr. Raymond Osei. Grace saw him and stopped walking, just for a second, just long enough for the room to register on her senses. The light, the chairs, the low murmur of conversation, the smell of coffee and copier toner. And him. Raymond. Older, heavier, polished, wearing a suit that cost more than her rent. His face was the face she had loved, run through a filter of time and ambition, hardened at the edges, smoothed at the surface. He was not looking at her. He was looking at his phone, scrolling with his thumb, his Mont Blanc pen lying on the table beside a glass of water. Kwame touched her elbow. "Breathe," he said, so quietly that only she could hear. Grace breathed. She walked to the seats Adana had reserved in the second row, close enough to be seen, far enough to observe. Adana was already there, her burgundy suit sharp as a blade, her briefcase open, her face calm with the particular calm of a lawyer who knows she is holding a winning hand. She nodded at Grace, touched her arm briefly, and said, "Sit down. It starts in 10 minutes." Elijah sat beside his mother. Kwame sat beside Elijah. 3 generations of Osei, grandmother's love, grandson's courage, grandfather's justice, in a row of folding chairs facing the man who had tried to erase them all. The hearing was called to order by the board chair, a heavyset woman named Mrs. Patricia Coleman, who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke with the brisk efficiency of someone who ran meetings the way a conductor runs a train. She outlined the proceedings, the school's case first, then the family's response, then questions from the board. Simple, orderly, professional. Dr. Ames went first. She stood, smoothed her blazer, and presented her case with the confidence of someone who had done this before and always won. Elijah Osei has been the subject of multiple behavioral reports over 3 academic years, she said, reading from her folder. He demonstrates consistent difficulty integrating with peers, participating in classroom activities, and meeting the social-emotional standards we expect at Jefferson Elementary. She glanced at Grace, then quickly away. We have recommended expulsion as a last resort, after exhausting all other avenues. What avenues? Adana asked, standing. Her voice was clear and carried easily in the tiered room. Can you list the specific interventions the school attempted before recommending expulsion? Dr. Ames blinked. We spoke with his mother about alternative placements. That's not an intervention, Adana said. That's a suggestion to leave. I'll ask again. What specific, documented interventions did Jefferson Elementary implement for Elijah Osei? Counseling? Tutoring? An IEP assessment? A bullying investigation? A peer mediation session? Silence. Dr. Ames opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The behavioral reports were filed by teachers who witnessed the aftermath of bullying and blamed the victim. Adana cut in. She held up a copy of Miss Chen's cafeteria report. This report states that Elijah initiated a verbal confrontation. I have 5 student witnesses who confirm that another student, Marcus Pike, verbally harassed Elijah for several minutes before Elijah responded. That student is not named in this report. That student has no disciplinary record. That student's father is a major donor to the school's athletic program. Do you see the pattern, Dr. Ames, or do I need to draw it on the whiteboard? A murmur rippled through the audience. Grace sat rigid, her hands clasped in her lap. Elijah watched Adana with wide eyes, his lips slightly parted. He had never seen anyone fight like this, with words, with precision, with the cold, surgical accuracy of someone dismantling a machine. Dr. Ames reddened. She looked toward the front table, toward Raymond, for support. Raymond was staring straight ahead, his face absolutely blank, his pen untouched, his water undrunk. He gave no signal, no nod, no reassurance. Furthermore, Adana continued, turning to the board, the school's anti-bullying compliance reports for the past 3 years are remarkably thin. I requested them under open records, and what I received was 17 pages for an entire school. The state average is 64. Jefferson Elementary has either failed to investigate bullying complaints or failed to document them. Either way, this school has violated its own policies. Mrs. Coleman removed her reading glasses, polished them, and put them back on. Dr. Ames, do you have a response to these allegations? Dr. Ames was gripping her folder so tightly that the edges bent. The school follows all district protocols, she said, but her voice had lost its polish. It sounded thin, defensive, like a wall with cracks. Which brings me, Adana said, turning slowly toward the front table, toward Raymond, to the district itself. The room went very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone in a room simultaneously realizes that what they thought was a routine meeting is about to become something else entirely. Dr. Osei, Adana said, addressing Raymond directly, You approve this expulsion recommendation, is that correct? Raymond straightened in his chair. His face was still blank, but his hands told a different story. His right hand moved to his pen, his left hand pressed flat against the table. The superintendent's office reviews all expulsion recommendations, he said, his voice measured, professional. I approved it based on the school's assessment. Did you review the student's full file before approving? Adana asked. I reviewed the summary provided by the school. So you saw the student's name? I saw the file, yes. The student's name is Elijah Osei. Adana paused. Let the name hang in the air. Let it settle on every ear in the room. Your last name, Dr. Osei, the same last name. Another pause. And the student's mother is Grace Osei, a woman you knew personally 11 years ago. The murmur in the room became a current. Heads turned. Eyes shifted. Mrs. Coleman leaned forward. Raymond's jaw tightened. Just barely, just enough for someone watching closely to see the muscle jump. I don't see the relevance of, Raymond began. The relevance, Adana interrupted, and her voice was pure steel now. No warmth, no politeness, just the blade. Is that Elijah Osei is your son? She held up a document. This is a notarized statement from Derek Phillips, your college roommate, confirming that 11 years ago, you paid him $200 to pose as a lawyer and deliver a false message to Grace Osei. The message that your family wanted nothing to do with her or her unborn child. A child who was, and is, yours. The room exploded, not with noise, but with the absence of it. Every sound stopped, every movement froze. A parent in the third row covered her mouth with both hands. A board member's pen clattered to the table. The reporter from the local newspaper was writing so fast her hand blurred. Raymond's face went gray. Not white, gray. The color of something dying. His composure, that polished, practiced, decade-old composure, didn't crack. It shattered. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His eyes, for the first time, moved to Elijah. He looked at the boy sitting in the second row, and the boy looked back at him, and in that exchange, in that 3-second lock of identical brown eyes, 11 years of lies collapsed like a building in an earthquake. Dr. Osei, Adana continued, relentless, you approved the expulsion of your own biological son, a child you knowingly abandoned, from a school district you oversee. This constitutes a conflict of interest under Section 4.7 of the district's Ethics Code and a violation of disclosure requirements under state law. She placed the document on the table in front of the board. I am filing a formal ethics complaint, and I am requesting the immediate reversal of Elijah Osei's expulsion. Raymond's hand moved to the glass of water. He picked it up, brought it to his lips, and set it down without drinking. His hand was shaking. The water trembled in the glass. A small liquid earthquake visible to everyone in the front row. This is a personal matter, Raymond said, his voice barely holding its shape. It has no bearing on the administrative decision. A personal matter. Kwame's voice cut through the room. He did not shout. He did not raise his volume, but his voice, that deep, resonant courtroom voice, silenced everything else the way a bell silences chatter. He stood, slowly, unfolding from his chair with the deliberate grace of a man who had stood before judges and juries and truth commissions. He buttoned his suit jacket. He looked at his son. Raymond, Kwame said. Raymond's face drained of whatever color was left. He stared at his father, at the man he had abandoned, the man he had stopped calling, the man whose disgrace he had used as an excuse to sever the last bond of family. And for the first time in the hearing, his mask was completely gone. Underneath it was the face of a boy, a terrified boy. "Dad," Raymond whispered. The word was so small, so involuntary, that it sounded like something that had escaped from a locked room. "You lied to this woman," Kwame said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "You told her that I rejected her, that your mother and I wanted nothing to do with her child, our grandchild." He paused. "Your mother died never knowing she had a grandson. You stole that from her. You stole 11 years from me, and you stole a father from that boy." He pointed at Elijah, not dramatically, not with a flourish, but with a simple, steady hand, the hand of a man who has spent his life pointing at evidence. "Your son, Raymond. Look at him." Raymond looked. He had no choice. Every eye in the room was on him, and the weight of their attention was a physical force, pressing him into his chair, stripping away the title and the suit and the pen and the office, leaving only the man underneath. The man who had paid $200 to break a heart and signed a piece of paper to destroy a future, and sat in meetings and smiled for photos and climbed and climbed and climbed, never once looking down at the people he had stepped on. Elijah stood up. Grace reached for his arm, but he was already standing, his small body straight, his chin up, his hands at his sides. He looked at the man behind the table, at his father, though the word felt strange and hollow, like a room with no furniture, and opened his mouth. "My name," Elijah said, and the stutter came, but softly, gently, like a whisper from a wound that was healing, "is Elijah Osei." He took a breath. The technique Kwame taught him: fill the belly, tap the thigh, release the words one at a time. "My mama works 3 jobs. She cleans houses so I can eat. She cleans offices so I can have shoes. She cleans mansions so I can have books." His voice was shaking, but it was climbing, rising, filling the room the way light fills a window at dawn. "I have a stutter, but that doesn't mean I don't have something to say." The silence that followed was sacred. There was no other word for it. It was the kind of silence that falls in churches and courtrooms and hospital rooms. The silence that means something has just been witnessed that cannot be unsaid, undone, or unfelt. A parent in the back row wiped her eyes. A board member stared at the table in front of her. The reporter from the news station had lowered her notebook and was just watching, her face open, her eyes bright. Mrs. Coleman spoke first. Her voice was thick but professional. "I think the board has heard enough for a preliminary decision. We will recess for 30 minutes. Dr. Osei, please remain seated. Dr. Ames, you are dismissed from the table." Dr. Ames stood, her face the color of old paper. She gathered her folder, her pen, her composure, what was left of it, and walked to a seat in the back of the room, where she sat down and did not look up. The recess was chaos. Parents talked in urgent clusters. The reporter was on her phone, dictating notes. Adana sat with Grace and Kwame in the hallway outside room 304, on a bench that was too short for 3 adults, and they sat pressed together like passengers on a crowded bus, bound by something that had no name but felt like family. "He's going to try to bargain," Adana said. "He'll offer to reverse the expulsion quietly. He'll ask for confidentiality. He'll try to make this go away." "Can he?" Grace asked. "He can try," Adana said, "but Derek's statement is on the record. The conflict of interest is on the record. And once the board makes their ruling, it's public." She looked at Grace. "The question is, what do you want?" Grace looked down at her hands, the same cracked knuckles, the same small cut on her thumb. But they were different now. They were not just the hands of a cleaning woman. They were the hands of a mother who had walked into a room full of power and watched it bow. "I want Elijah in school," she said. "I want Marcus Pike's parents called in. I want a real anti-bullying program, not a poster in the hallway. I want Dr. Ames to know what she did." She paused. "And I want Raymond to know what he lost." Kwame looked at her. His eyes were steady, his face calm, but something moved behind the calm, a respect so deep it was almost reverence. This woman, this cleaning woman with her broken zipper purse and her safety pin heart. She had raised his grandson alone, without money, without help, without even the truth. And she had raised him well. Better than Raymond, with all his money and his titles and his oak-paneled office, had ever managed to become. "You are a remarkable woman, Miss Osei," Kwame said quietly. Grace looked at him. "I'm a mother," she said. "That's all. That's everything." The board reconvened. Mrs. Coleman read the preliminary decision in a voice that left no room for interpretation. The expulsion of Elijah Osei was reversed, effective immediately. The school was ordered to conduct a full review of its anti-bullying protocols. Dr. Victoria Ames was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into her handling of Elijah's case. And Dr. Raymond Osei was referred to the State Ethics Board for failure to disclose a conflict of interest. Raymond sat through the ruling like a statue. His pen lay on the table, untouched. His water was untouched. His phone was face down. When the ruling was read, he closed his eyes, and something crossed his face. Not remorse, not quite, but the shadow of remorse, the ghost of a feeling he had not allowed himself to feel in over a decade. When he opened his eyes, they were wet, and he wiped them quickly with the back of his hand, the way his father had done hours earlier in a small apartment surrounded by books. After the hearing, in the hallway, Raymond approached Grace. He walked slowly, his hands at his sides, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his tie loosened, all the armor disassembled. He stopped 3 feet away from her, the distance between them thick with years and lies and everything that should have been different. "Grace," he said. Just her name, nothing else. As if the name alone were a confession. Grace looked at him. She did not step closer. She did not step back. She stood exactly where she was, rooted, solid, unbreakable. "You knew," she said. "You saw his name on that file, and you knew, and you signed the paper anyway." Raymond's mouth opened, closed. His jaw worked. I thought if I... He stopped. There were no words. There were no sentences polished enough, no speeches rehearsed enough, no excuses crafted enough to bridge the gap between what he had done and what he should have done. He looked past Grace, to the bench where Kwame and Elijah sat side by side, the old man's hand on the boy's shoulder, the boy leaning into his grandfather the way sunflowers lean toward light. "I want to know him," Raymond said, and his voice cracked on the word "no," like glass hitting concrete. "You don't get to want that," Grace said, and her voice was quiet, controlled, devastatingly calm. "You don't get to abandon a child for 11 years and then show up wanting to know him because the cameras are rolling and your career is over. That is not how fatherhood works. That is not how love works. And that is not how I raised my son." Raymond flinched. It was the flinch of a man who has just heard the truth and recognized it. The way you recognize your own face in a mirror you've been avoiding. "I'm not saying no forever," Grace continued. "I'm saying not now, not today. Elijah will decide, when he's ready, if he wants you in his life. And if that day comes, you will earn it. You will show up. You will be patient. You will let him set the pace. And you will never, ever lie to him." Raymond nodded. He could not speak. He turned and walked down the hallway, his expensive shoes clicking on the polished floor, each click sounding emptier than the last. At the end of the hallway, he stopped at a water fountain, bent down, and drank. The water was cold. It tasted like nothing. He straightened, wiped his mouth, and kept walking, out of the building, into the parking lot, into his car, where he sat behind the wheel for 45 minutes with the engine off, staring at the dashboard, alone with the wreckage of a life he had built on a foundation of sand. The story made the local news that evening. The reporter's segment was brief, 3 minutes, but the facts were devastating. A superintendent accused of secretly expelling his own biological son. A cover-up spanning over a decade. A disgraced former judge who had been quietly teaching his unknown grandson to speak. The segment included a photo of Elijah, not his face, just his hands, folded on the table during the hearing. And the image went viral in the way that only images of courage go viral. It was shared 12,000 times in 2 days. Parents from across the county called the school board. 2 other families came forward with stories about Dr. Ames dismissing their bullying complaints. A state education official opened a formal review of the district. Raymond resigned the following Monday. His letter of resignation was 4 sentences long. He cited personal reasons. Claudia, his wife, moved out the same week. She left a note on the kitchen counter. 1 line, handwritten on her monogram stationery. "I married a man. I don't know what you are." Dr. Ames was fired 2 weeks later. Not placed on leave. Fired. The investigation found that she had dismissed 14 bullying complaints over 5 years, all involving students from lower-income families, all involving accusers from donor families. She cleared out her office on a Thursday afternoon, carrying 2 boxes past a hallway of closed doors. Nobody came out to say goodbye. The brass nameplate was removed by Friday morning. Marcus Pike was not expelled, but he was transferred to a different school, at his parents' request, after 4 families filed formal bullying complaints against him. His father, the car dealership owner, threatened to sue the district, then didn't. Lawyers advised him that the publicity would be worse than the settlement. Marcus left Jefferson Elementary on a Tuesday, carrying the same backpack he'd always carried, wearing the same gold chain. He did not look back. Nobody called his name. Months passed. Fall turned to winter. Winter softened into spring. Elijah returned to Jefferson Elementary the Monday after the hearing. He walked through the front doors with his backpack straps pulled tight, the same way he always had, but his shoulders were different. His chin was different. The girl from the front row, the one who had smiled at him after his history answer, was waiting by the lockers. "Hey, Elijah," she said. Just that. Just his name. No stutter jokes, no pity, just recognition. "Hey," Elijah said back. One syllable, clean, clear. His. He still went to Kwame's apartment every Saturday. They still worked on his speech, still practiced breathing, still read books together in the leather chair by the window. But now the sessions were different. They were not just about language, they were about family. Kwame told Elijah stories about his grandmother, who had died before Elijah was born, a woman who made jollof rice that could bring tears to your eyes, and who sang hymns so beautifully that the church fell silent every time she opened her mouth. About Kwame's own childhood in Accra, running barefoot through red clay streets, catching lizards, hiding from his mother when he was supposed to be doing homework. About the law, about justice, about what it costs to tell the truth, and why the cost is always worth paying. Elijah listened the way only a child who has been starved for stories can listen, with his whole body, leaning forward, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, absorbing every word the way dry earth absorbs rain. And sometimes, in the middle of a story, he would reach over and put his hand on Kwame's arm, and the old man would go quiet, and they would sit together in the warm silence of the apartment, grandfather and grandson, 2 people who had found each other against every odd, every lie, every wall that had been built between them. Grace kept cleaning. She did not quit her jobs. She did not suddenly come into money or move into a mansion or receive a windfall that changed her circumstances overnight. Life is not a fairy tale, and Grace knew that better than most. But something had changed, not her situation, but her position. She walked differently. She spoke differently. She held the phone differently when landlords called, when bill collectors called, when anyone called who expected her to be small. She was not small. She had never been small. She had only been quiet. And quiet is not the same thing as small, the way a river is not the same as a puddle. One is still because it is shallow, the other because it is deep. Adana filed a civil suit on Grace's behalf, not for money, though money was part of it, for accountability. The suit alleged fraud, emotional distress, and the intentional interference with a parent-child relationship. Raymond's lawyers contacted Adana within a week, offering a settlement. Adana told Grace the number. Grace looked at it, looked at Adana, and said, "Is it enough to send Elijah to college?" "It's enough to send him twice," Adana said. "Then take it," Grace said. "I don't need his money for myself, but Elijah deserves every door that was ever closed on him to be opened." The settlement was signed on a Wednesday morning. Grace did not attend. She was at work. She was cleaning the Moreau mansion, polishing the kitchen counters, when Adana texted her, "It's done." Grace read the message, set her phone down, and finished polishing the counter. Then she went to the pantry, took out the leftover roast chicken Mrs. Moreau had said she could have, and put it in her bag for Elijah's dinner. Some things don't change just because other things do. And Grace did not need them to. One Sunday in April, Kwame invited Grace and Elijah to his apartment for dinner. He cooked jollof rice, his wife's recipe, the one that could bring tears to your eyes. The apartment smelled like tomatoes and onions and cumin and something deeper, something old and sweet, like memory itself. They sat at his small table, the three of them, crowded together, knees touching, passing bowls and bread and stories across the surface. "Mr. Kwame," Elijah said. He still called him Mr. Kwame, though he knew the truth, as if the formal name were a bridge he was crossing slowly, one plank at a time. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything," Kwame said. "Did you ever want to give up? When they took everything from you?" Kwame set his fork down. He looked at the boy, this remarkable boy, his grandson, the child of his estranged son and a cleaning woman who had more courage in her cracked hands than most people carry in their entire bodies. And he thought about the question the way he used to think about legal arguments. Seriously, honestly, without shortcuts. "Yes," he said, "many times. After your grandmother died, I sat in this apartment for 3 months and did not leave. I did not cook, I did not read, I did not answer the phone. I sat in that chair by the window and watched the light change and thought about giving up." He paused. "But then one day, a boy from the neighborhood knocked on my door. He was 7. He could barely say his own name. His mother stood behind him, holding his hand, and she looked at me the way your mother looked at me the first time, with hope, but also with that look that says, 'I know you might not be able to help, but I have nowhere else to go.'" Kwame smiled, a real smile, warm and full. "I helped that boy, and helping him helped me. And that is how I learned the thing I want to teach you, Elijah. The way out of your own pain is through someone else's door." Elijah nodded slowly. He put a forkful of rice in his mouth, chewed, swallowed. Then he said, without any stutter at all, clear as morning, steady as stone, "This rice is really good, Grandpa." It was the first time he had called Kwame Grandpa. The word fell into the room like a stone into still water, and the ripples went everywhere. Across Kwame's face, across Grace's eyes, across the small table with its mismatched plates and its borrowed chairs, and its feast that tasted like everything that had ever been lost and found again. Kwame could not speak. His mouth opened, but the words that had carried him through decades of courtrooms and commissions and cross-examinations, those words were gone, replaced by something larger, something that did not need language, something that lived in the space between a grandfather's hand reaching across a table and a grandson's hand reaching back. Grace watched them. She pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose, slow and steady, the way Kwame had taught Elijah to breathe before speaking. The way she had taught herself to breathe before doing anything that required all of her. She picked up her glass of water, just water, nothing fancy, from Kwame's kitchen tap, and took a sip. The water tasted sweet. For the first time in 11 years, plain water tasted sweet. She set the glass down and looked at the two of them, the old man and the boy, the judge and the child, the grandfather and the grandson, holding hands across a table in a tiny apartment on the east side of town. And she understood, with a clarity that was almost blinding, that this was what all the scrubbing and cleaning and early mornings and late nights and bitten tongues and swallowed tears had been for. Not the settlement, not the hearing, not the victory. This table, this meal, these hands. She finished her rice, she washed the dishes, she dried them with a towel that had a small hole in the corner and hung them on the rack. Kwame walked them to the door the way he always did, and this time Elijah hugged him. A real hug, tight and fierce, the hug of a boy who is holding on to something he is never going to let go. They rode the bus home. The city was dark, the streetlights casting orange pools on the sidewalk. Elijah leaned against Grace's shoulder, sleepy, full, warm. She put her arm around him and rested her chin on top of his head. The bus hummed beneath them. The city scrolled past the windows. Someone's radio played somewhere, faint and far away. Grace closed her eyes. The ceramic mug was still on the kitchen counter when they got home. Grace put the leftover jollof rice in the fridge, checked the locks, turned off the lights. She stopped at the counter and looked at the mug. World's best mom. The letters were fading, but they were still there. She tucked a $20 bill inside, her tip from the Moreau job. The emergency fund was growing, slowly, the way everything in her life grew, through patience, through labor, through the stubborn refusal to believe that a woman on her knees is a woman who has been defeated. She checked on Elijah. He was already asleep, lying on his side, one arm under the pillow. His breathing was slow and even. Above him, Frederick Douglass looked down from the poster, patient and proud and enduring. Grace stood in the doorway and listened to her son breathe. Each breath was steady. Each breath was sure. Each breath was a word that the world had tried to silence and failed. She turned off the hallway light and went to bed. The apartment was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the quiet of absence, not the quiet of things unsaid, but the quiet of things settled, things resolved, things finally, at last, in their right place. It was a quiet she had earned with her hands, her back, her heart, and her voice. And it was hers. Every single decibel of it. The gold earring sat on her nightstand, beside the alarm clock that would ring at 4:30. She touched one of them with her fingertip. Her mother's earring, warm from her skin, small and solid and real. Then she lay down, pulled the blanket to her chin, and closed her eyes. Outside, the city murmured its low, restless song. Somewhere, a bus was running its last route. Somewhere, an office building stood dark and empty. Somewhere, a man sat alone in a house that was too big, staring at a photo he had never hung on the wall. And somewhere, in a small apartment full of books, an old man sat in his leather chair by the window, holding a glass of water he had forgotten to drink, smiling at nothing and everything, because his grandson had called him Grandpa, and the word was still ringing in his ears like a bell, like a verdict, like the first true sentence of a story that was only just beginning. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If you enjoyed the story, your like really helps the channel grow.